Hello and welcome to this new episode of Harmoniously podcast. So here is Melissa.
And Rachel, good morning or afternoon or evening.
And yes, thank you, Rachel, for being with us again. And today we're going to talk about challenges experienced during ketamine treatment and also post treatment.
Definitely. I think, challenging experiences are, we're not short of them in this life. Like, challenging experiences can happen to us at any point in life, but especially with psychedelic type medicines, it can be such an altered state of challenging that it can be a more difficult thing to manage. So,
Yeah.
I
Would you
think
like
we
to
should,
start first with our tune in and then we
yeah,
go into all these challenges? All
yes.
right. So, as we just created this new ritual for our podcast, and so let's take just a moment to arrive into this space. We can close our eyes. Whoever's listening, you can close your eyes and just like tune in to yourself. Tune into this moment. Just allow yourself to connect with your breath and to be arriving to this moment and space. All right, we can coming back and keep going with the challenges experiences.
I was
So,
reading a little bit about like challenging experiences.
uh-huh.
And I was just wondering like what new literature was out there. And really the greatest body of evidence out there is like challenging life experiences, not challenging psychedelic experiences. But I thought how similar they are. Like most of the time, if we really reframe this into like just being a challenging experiences, these can be things if we like allow them to be that build resilience, that build fortitude, that build mental strength in some ways. And by no means am I suggesting we should have challenging experiences or like try for them. But I do think that when we experience challenging things, oftentimes it does make us stronger. It does make us more resilient. It does offer us insight and learning. So I
Yes.
think it's about folding that into like challenging experiences are a part of life, right? Like they're not something to avoid or to um, have this kind of negative association with. Challenging experiences, I think I was thinking a little bit about the idea that suffering is inevitable. And I think we oftentimes try to avoid suffering in so many ways, but we need to be able to incorporate suffering because it's inevitable. We are going to have it. And that's just kind of my general framework for it.
Yeah.
But in this, especially in a ketamine treatment type program, it's always possible that we could have a challenging experience. So let's talk a little bit about, I guess,
Yeah.
the reasons why this might
And
happen.
I would like to just add, like all psychedelics, there's
Yes,
can be challenging
all
experience.
psychedelics.
All
And I
psychedelics.
do think like there is a statistical like analysis that they're more
Oh,
common with other types of psychedelics.
okay.
Um, so they are less common with ketamine. So that
Oh,
is,
okay. That's a
and
good
I'm,
news for
yeah,
all the people out there that want to try this different experience, the different state of consciousness, and they are a little scared. So ketamine is definitely
yeah,
a first step. That can also just be the only step, but definitely can be a great first
yeah,
step.
yes. But they can still happen. And I think
Mhm.
some of the bigger reasons I see that challenging experiences can come up are when we have unprocessed trauma. So, like when we're
Mm.
carrying trauma inside or little trauma inside that has not been examined or reviewed in any way or processed, like through psychotherapy or coaching or other ways, this is common for it to kind of emerge inside of a psychedelic experience. But that doesn't mean that everyone with PTSD or trauma is going to experience something challenging inside of an experience. But I mention it because I want clients to know and people to know that when we have, and everyone has trauma, but it's really some of that unprocessed stuff that can kind of emerge inside of an experience. Statistically, it's actually very unusual to have repressed memories come out but it can. And that can happen in
Mm.
anything. It could happen in situations, it could happen with psychedelics, it can happen for lots of reasons. So I think it's just good to take into like the awareness as we move into these types of experiences. I think the other reasons I see challenging experiences, and I think we touched a little on this, but like the consumption we have prior, right? If we've been
Oh,
watching a
yes.
lot of crime TV, guilty. If we were watching, a lot of really dark or chaotic or, perhaps horror type films, movies, content, like there are always reasons that like the content, the consumption we've had in the days and weeks prior could manifest forward. Our
Mhm.
subconscious or unconscious carries some of this imagery or metaphor. So it might be more apt to use something darker as a metaphor versus something lighter. So there's, I think, something to that. So it's at least worth the
Mhm.
like awareness surrounding our content and the things we consume surrounding experiences, especially in the non-ordinary state. Other reasons, I see a lot of folks that are, ketamine can be a bit of a like treatment regime. So we're kind of trying to fit in our dose once or twice a week for some of us. And we're also very busy humans here. So sometimes it's just that we're really busy. We're trying to get our dose day in, or we had a tough day with our boss and come home and our partners are kind of edgy and maybe the kids are going crazy. And I think that's a really important area that I see is very common to create a challenging experience. The whole experience ends up feeling more chaotic. It ends up feeling more, we feel more out of control. We might have a darker imagery. They might be less meaningful for us. So really setting up our experience to kind of have time and space. It can be such a beautiful act of self-care to show up in this space with presence and being grounded, being prepared for it. And that also means that if it isn't a great day or we set off with the intention that this was going to be the day and it turns out to not be a great day, then it's
Mhm.
like pivot and say, okay, not today. Like this is not what's good for me today, and moving to a different, time period. I see a lot of folks that do that and they go, but I planned for today and Thursday's my best day. And, you know, Thursday got away from them and the kids were late from school or whatever it is. And it ends up being a little bit more edgy and chaotic. So choosing
Mhm.
times that really are best served for moving into the non-ordinary state, creating presence of mind, being relaxed as you move into the experience. There's been a few analysis studies that have been done surrounding the challenging experience with psychedelics. And one thing that comes up often is a negative mindset. So that's
Mhm.
one of the big key triggers of moving into a challenging experience is a negative mindset starting out. So I think it's important to be thoughtful surrounding like where is our mindset as we and it's that set and setting component, right? Like,
Mhm.
where are we as we move
Absolutely.
into the non-ordinary state? So I think like as we've talked about before, setting up your space to really be more harmonious, right? Like we want to
Mhm.
have the right music, we want to have the right lighting, we want to prepare our mind and our body to enter this non-ordinary space, stretch our consciousness. So I think those things can really bode well for a more positive experience. Checking in with self. Where is our mindset today? Are we in kind of a darker, negative mindset? We all have them. Is it a space that we're open? I think that's a really big part of having a more positive or meaningful experience. Um, I think sometimes too, depending on the dosing, we often see that patients that go faster into a deeper dosing than they're prepared for. This is why
Mm.
we often, with ketamine treatment, will use somewhat of a titrated approach. We start in a lower dose profile. We want to make sure our nervous systems are prepared for how that might feel, even if
Mhm.
it's and moving into deeper or more psychedelic transformational states with a little bit of time. This gives us some time to prepare for how this feels. It makes us feel less out of control. So we
Mm.
do see a correlation between those that are I think there's sometimes a mindset that like more is better, right? Like more, deeper, better,
Yeah.
psychedelic, like go further is better, but it isn't. And we do see that there's a correlation between taking much higher doses than we're prepared for and having those
Oh.
like challenging experiences. Do you
Mhm.
agree?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And it's true. I think there is this in the West, at least, there is this. wanting or chasing of deeper, more, right? And in psychedelic, this more definitely does not work. This mentality does not work because you're going to do a jump bigger than your leg. You want to take in a way that is not overwhelming. When you reach a point that is overwhelming, it's no more a space for learning or for like growth. Of
Yes.
course, you can argue that you can always learn something, like that was too much and overwhelming doesn't work, but
And that's true. I think you're right. Like, there's something still to even be learned from that, right? Like, the takeaway
Mhm,
could still be, okay, I learned my personal boundary, or I learned my threshold, or I learned my,
mhm.
that more isn't more. I've had
Yes.
oftentimes people try to figure this out and have it the hard way. And I don't think it
Mhm,
has. So I always kind of frame that when I start treatment with someone, that that's the case. More is not always more in
mhm.
almost all things. Less can be more. I have found very transformational experiences can occur at much lower doses than we might imagine,
Yes.
simply because of the adaptability the ability to create narrative. So there's lots of reasons why more isn't always more.
Mhm.
And I think music is a huge one. People often forget that the music we have chosen or that is playing for us can
Ah,
be a
yes.
really big predictor, right?
Yes, can really trigger sometimes. Like we already discussed, has lyric free is the best.
Mhm.
So any music that is like more meditation music, maybe with mantra, or like I
Mhm.
remember you love in particular, like Native American music. You
Yeah.
can also find like still South American music, like
Mhm.
from the Amazonian tribes and so on.
Yeah.
But anyway, lyric freeze. That's because the lyrics,
Mhm.
because we both agree on the fact that it's better that you find your answer within yourself and not when there is some lyrics. The lyrics almost, even though they're beautiful and there are so many beautiful songs, but they're still like they take away from you the ability to find the answers within.
Yes.
Um, and as we were saying about challenging experiences, sometimes the music, if it's not, if like it has like some maybe notes or like harmony that is a little bit on a darker side, I would say that,
Mhm.
or the all the minor keys, I think.
Yes.
Okay, the minor keys that can trigger some sadness, uh,
Mhm.
that can probably also trigger some challenges. And so, if I can share my experience, is there was some music that were like not even because some listener can think, okay, but what if it triggers some sadness, whatever? So maybe it's good. I have to go through the sadness.
Mhm.
Okay, but here we're talking about, or at least in my experience, there's some music that it's not that they trigger really something within you that you
Mhm.
want to work or face or whatever. They may trigger like overwhelm the nervous system.
Yes.
So there is nothing there that is something that can benefit you because it's something that's been repressed that you can heal. No, it just like triggers the nervous system and makes your
Mhm.
body feel very uncomfortable, and your nervous system feel very uncomfortable. And
Mhm.
under those the states with psychedelic, you just everything is very enhanced, and so this uncomfort is very enhanced, and so you just feel very uncomfortable, not because there's anything really there for you to
Yeah.
process. It's just because it's overwhelming your nervous system, and that is, there's no use to do that really.
Yes. Yes. I think it's so right. Like, it punctuates this like negative kind of body sense, and that
Hmm.
ultimately overwhelms our nervous system. Exactly right. And it takes us into a negative space that's very difficult to kind of break free of in our non-ordinary consciousness. And you're right, there's usually, it's not because we're moving towards like working through the work, it's really just negative all around. And
Hmm.
music, I see time and time again, is a huge choreographer for this type
Yeah.
of experience, and it absolutely can sway. So things that I try to avoid, and there is some personal stuff here too, because brains are very associative. So our
Mm-hmm.
brains will look for tones and frequencies that elicit something. So if we grew up playing like symphony and, or, chamber music or orchestra, that might be a very pleasant memory that might evoke beautiful things. It might also not be. So there are certain tones and frequencies that are very personalized and associative. There are also some that just fall on the spectrum of being a little bit darker, a little bit more evocative in kind of negative tones. And that can be beautiful outside of the non ordinary state. But within the non ordinary state, we have a lot of walls that have come down, a lot of amygdala suppression. We have a very different set of consciousness. So it's important to, and I think we've talked about this before, kind of review or listen to some of this music prior. I had an experience once where it was a beautiful playlist, but in the middle there were like birds of prey that started making noises, and it was
Mm.
very jarring to me. So it like shocked my system when I was in the middle of this beautiful, like light kind of ambient experience. It like shocked my nervous system into like a different state of almost panic, because I was like, what
Mm-hmm.
is happening? I couldn't make sense of it. So it is something that, like, it's nice to review some of this music first, like make sure there's nothing that comes in or changes during this cadence that can really alter your experience. And there are so many beautifully cultivated playlists out there. Obviously, we've got some in our website. There's so many out there through Spotify and Apple Music and all kinds of other resources out there. But there are a lot of really well cultivated playlists. I think it's safe to choose things like solfeggio frequencies. They tend to be more uplifting, healing kind of vibrations. I think ambient and trance tends to
Mm-hmm.
play really well. It's a little more subdued. I think that oftentimes tribal music can play well, but some people do get a little provoked by percussion. So it's important.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes that bassy kind of tone can really give us a body sense. So it's important to note that like prior. Do you have other favorites, Mel?
Well, as I was saying, probably they can look for Amazonian tribes music.
Yeah,
That could
that's
be
beautiful.
really well, because those are music that has been recorded from the tribes, sometimes during ceremonies. So they already are medicine songs, but again, they're like, I mean, there's lyrics, but it's in a language that is not understandable. So
Yeah,
that's like a mantra. So that solves the lyric issue.
yeah,
And so they're really very uplifting and very spiritual. So I think that could be a good choice as well.
yeah, definitely. And always kind of review, beforehand to make sure it's still a good fit for that day. And I'll be
Mm-hmm.
honest, it does feel a bit different in different days. So it's worth kind of having a few things that you're ready that you can choose from to mark certain days. Certain days we want to feel a more relaxed sensation. Certain days we want to feel a little bit more processing kind of depth. So it's important to kind of have some options available. I think that can be really helpful. And
Mm-hmm.
always like being aware of our mindset as we move into the non-ordinary state. I can't like underscore that enough. I think that our
Mm-hmm.
mindset is really the biggest part of that set that makes an impact in the experience. If we're going in a fight with our partner and, work's been challenging, we're almost ensuring that we're going to have a more challenging experience than if we were to wait and honor like our own life
Mm-hmm.
path. Like, okay, maybe in a few days it'll be a better opportunity. Because with ketamine treatment, there's no detriment to skipping a dose. Yes, ideally, we want to be building on some of the metabolites of this medicine to build on neuroplasticity, to build on some of the neuro resetting that we get. But that doesn't mean that we should be forcing anything. So we should always be honoring, like, hey, this week I was sick, or kids were sick, I was in a fight, like I had to pivot for a few days. I think that's the best kind of takeaway of that, is like, it's okay. There's no negative impact. It's only when we talk about really maximizing the benefits of this treatment that we're really kind of pressing that cadence. It doesn't
Mm-hmm.
mean it has to be perfectly regimented and Thursdays only, and, no matter what, I do my dose. Not at all. And I think that's a life lesson as well, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's a bigger message there, but
Yeah, exactly. And also about the mindset.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
When you are in non-ordinary state, uh, you can also learn this lesson of, as you just said, the mindset. It's very hard. So ideally, especially if you're very new to this, you want to just postpone it, not doing, like, be aware, because otherwise when you go in, there is this big lesson. And let's say that the medicine gave me this lesson in multiple ceremonies, and
Mm-hmm.
how
Yeah.
deep you can almost play with your mind, and you can see if you can go negative, and you
Mm-hmm.
feel what you feel, and you feel overwhelmed, and then you shift it. So you learn how to consciously shift it to see, okay, so then if I go positive, this is how it happens. And that's a lesson of what happens normally. You're just not that aware because it's not, those senses are not that enhanced, but it happen all the time. But it's a very, very, very it's a very hard thing to do, to be in a non-ordinary state and then be able to play with that, to learn how to stay more on, or create an ambience in your mind that is more suitable to whatever you want.
Yeah.
And I would definitely invite anyone to do that in meditation,
Mm-hmm.
not in the non-ordinary state.
Yes.
In doing in meditation, and observation, but meditation, maybe with a coach, and do
Yeah.
that
Definitely.
prior. Also, even though it's still a great suggestion to, if you know that you're not in a good mindset to go into doing your treatment and you want to postpone it, those are all great exercises and great preparation that you can do beforehand and with your coach, to be always aware of that, or where you're at.
Yeah. And I think there is a very valuable place for coaches,
Mm-hmm.
therapists, all kinds of support, spiritual support, etc., whatever's working for you or whatever current relationship you're in, to kind of really talk about and explore these things, to start that preparation process long before, we're ready for medicine. This could be days or weeks of processing the right kind of mental space or the right kind of time of day or what have you. And I think that's another piece. Time of day can play a part. Sometimes we have bright, fresh energy in the daytime, but it can be a little bit darker in the evenings.
Mm-hmm.
So just kind of being thoughtful about all of those things that kind of fold into this prep for our
Mm-hmm.
non-ordinary state. But what happens when we do have a challenging experience and now we're all
Yes.
medicine and there's no going back? So once you're there, sometimes these things come up no matter what you've done, right? There could just be something that's coming up. Maybe our mind is using this metaphor to process something that is very crunchy for us, or a very difficult emotion we've been, I don't know, perhaps avoiding in the first place,
Mm-hmm.
or has been stuck. Sometimes these things will emerge with a bit of darkness because that's the weight they're carrying in us, right? This can happen regardless of how we've prepared. Sometimes this is
Mm-hmm.
how it
Oh,
presents.
yes.
So we're in this and something overwhelming or anxiety provoking or challenging has emerged. Like, what now do we do with it? How are we managing this with not our traditional faculties, our abilities to reason? How are we now managing this space? And I think there's a lot of things that you can do. A lot of them happened prior to starting this, right? So, like, we've
Mm-hmm.
prepared well. We have a really lovely support human with us that knows how to offer comfort, is present for us. And I think that's the first thing, is definitely having had a conversation with your peer support. Sometimes this is our partner, sometimes this is a close friend, sometimes this is our therapist. So having someone that's aware of how to intervene for you. Some people, touch can be very startling, right?
Mm-hmm.
And not wanted. So those are conversations that are important to have prior to the experience. For me, I love when my partner's next to me, can put a hand on me. It feels so comforting, so soothing. It's reassuring to me. And it
Mm-hmm.
can kind of make the difference between something that's starting to feel anxious or scary and something that's starting to feel very comforting and I can embrace. So I think peer support is one part that can be really important here at offering some outside reassurance or comfort to allow us to kind of lean into this experience. Um, and I think that's the second part, is leaning into it, right? In
Mm-hmm.
psychedelic, we have this old saying that, like,
Yeah.
resistance is where we get the anxiety, like the
Mm-hmm.
resistance expect, when we resist something that's coming forward,
Mm-hmm.
that's where we get upset. Leaning into anything that kind of comes forward is really typically our best advice. We want to
Yes.
embrace whatever it is that's coming forward, even if it feels scary, even if it feels dark, even if it feels overwhelming. We want to lean into it with a sense of perhaps empowerment, perhaps welcoming, perhaps availability. Like, I'm here to see whatever this is. I'm here to
Mm-hmm.
experience this. Do you agree, Mel? Do you feel like we have
Yeah,
to kind of embrace whatever it is that's emerging?
absolutely. And I think here the key or the support will be the breath.
Yes.
So find when I feel when those challenges experience happen, when this whatever that comes in that feels darker or scary or and so on, one becomes like overwhelmed is that when we let's say identify too much with that,
Mhm.
right? So we see that thing, we identify with that, whatever that is, and that and then it's hard to face that. It's hard to lean in and all that. But if we remember that we are more than that, in a sense, remember to go back to your breath, to go
Mhm.
back to a center.
Yeah.
There is the self. Go back to a center that is a center of calmness and steadiness.
Mhm.
Despite all of that, it's like I like the metaphor of the tornado, and you are
Mhm.
in the eye inside. So the breath is coming back, being in the eye of tornado inside. Everything is calm.
Yeah.
Coming back to that and observe. So remember, and the breath is what helps us, and so we can lean to all these things and allow
Mhm.
these things to come through us. At that point,
Mhm.
as you said, the resistance is what make it more challenging and hard, because you
Yeah.
create a battle, and the resistance will make it last longer as well.
Yes.
Uh, and so, but I understand it's because when we see that, identifying with that, then it's really hard to also just lean and surrender. But if you
Yeah.
know that that is just something that is just a storm, and you are in your center, and the breath helps you be in the center, then you can surrender to what happens in the storm because you're safe.
Yes. And I think that summarizes exactly the kind of like some of the most paramount mindset features. Like, I always remind folks to think about the experiences we're entering the non ordinary state, to say, I am safe and this is
Mm-hmm.
temporary. And I think that framework, that architecture we can give this moving into it, is something I find that people are able to kind of call forward again in the experience, that I am
Mm-hmm.
safe. And that might even be a visual practice that we practice prior, right? Like, for example, I always imagine folding myself back into my own light. There's a
Mm-hmm.
light energy that feels safe to me, that feels warm,
Mm-hmm.
that feels home, that feels grounded. And I think having some sort of imagery, or perhaps like you've mentioned, breath work, can be such an important part of getting us
Mm-hmm.
regrounded and centered back into self, so that there is a better aptitude to kind of embrace whatever it is surrounding us in this tornado, perhaps, right? This chaotic,
Mm-hmm.
whatever it might be. Um, and I think that this can take many forms too. I think we often miss some of the obvious too. Like, ego death is that state of like loss of identity, right? We've lost
Mm-hmm.
the architecture of what it means to have a sense of identity. Perhaps reality has started to melt away. So it's almost as if the construct of everything we have known in our traditional reality has somewhat melted away. So
Mm-hmm.
it can be the loss of time and space. It can be the loss of time, space, reality. Any kind of construct that we might have created in regular reality seems to have dissolved. That typically comes with the sense of loss of identity. I think ego death or ego obliteration is very difficult to describe unless you've had the experience. And then it gets really easy. It feels like nothing that existed before exists now. And it's very overwhelming. Do you agree? Have you had this experience, Mel? Or I'm sure you've had many participants who have had this experience.
Yes, yes. Well, sometimes, as I'm not native speaker, sometimes there are certain words, especially when I start doing entering in this realm of psychedelic, that I was keep wondering. One was ego death, another one was breakthrough, and I was like imagining something.
Yeah.
I didn't even know what to imagine, actually. And so, one was ego death, and I think you just described it very well. It can be on many different levels. And I also, like, on one hand, almost, I don't know, there was something that I didn't like about this idea. It's like hating the ego, and it's like, it's part of
Yes.
you. It's part of you.
Yes.
There is should be
Yeah.
your friend. But anyway, apart from that, maybe that's a longer discussion. But yes, there's definitely, I've seen many people going through
Yeah.
different levels of ego death. As you said, that can be from just losing sense of time and space to more.
Yeah.
And I would say, like, I remember one specific time that I had one that was so much ego death that I didn't even remember a human being existed. So that was no issue. I was actually perfect. I was actually perfectly fine.
Yes. That's an important point, because there is something, I think, that's just beyond that threshold. That is this almost deeper sense of connection, right? Like, there is nothing but energy, and we're all connected to all the energy that's ever been here or ever be here. There is this deeper sense of belonging and connection that I think so it's important to note, like, not all ego death or ego obliteration is challenging, right? Some people very much enjoy this. I was not
Oh,
one of
yes.
those people. I was less apt to enjoy this. And I think that makes sense given my mental makeup. So I think it can be very overwhelming for some of us and very pleasant for others of us. And it may be in the context of the experience as well. But that's not to say there isn't something just beyond that that can sometimes give us that sense of belonging or comfort or connection to something well beyond self, well beyond the definition of ego or identity, that is so much more inclusive and so much more, I think, connected. I think I often refer to, like, Carl Jung's work in, like, the collective unconscious. And it's almost as if all our collective unconsciousness are connected in that moment. And that can be a very beautiful experience and very transformational, right? That there's a different sense we come away with after that type of experience. Can also be jarring in the moment, right? To feel like there's no more reality. I think it's worth mentioning, right? Like, when reality starts to dissolve, it's weird. It's altering.
It depends how fast or slow that goes.
That's
Also.
true. Very true. The speed does matter. I think that's very true. Because when it happens all at once, it's like, oh boy, it's a bit for the senses to try to fold into. And I think ketamine tends to be a very rapid acting medication. So sometimes these experiences are an hour and a half, and it can come on very quickly that we're in this very deep, kind of profound state. So managing this can be something that's difficult. I remember, opening my eyes and getting regrounded in the architecture of, although it looked a little distorted, I could still tell, like, that is a door and this is a wall. So these types of things can also help us bring ourselves back to center. In ketamine experiences, we often are closing our eyes and allowing some this experience to occur kind of in an introspective way, like in our inner chemistry, organically. So we aren't interacting with our environment as much as we might be with some other psychedelics. And I think it's important to note that it actually can be a useful tool to then open your eyes and kind of reground in the architecture of reality. There are walls, there is space, there is a bed or my dog or what have you. So opening our eyes can also be that regrounding practice.
So even if it's distorted, you still, like, have a sense of, okay, because with out of psychedelic, it may happen that even if you open your eyes, it doesn't change anything.
It doesn't help. And it may not, but I will say that there's a good likeliness that it will, because ketamine's very susceptible to the like distraction element. So we find that just the distraction of opening our eyes starts to kind of pull us out of that deeper space.
Okay.
It's not always useful, but it definitely can be. So I think it's worth having in our tool shed.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
And then, like, is there any other tools? Because, like, when you work with psychedelic that have been used traditionally, the tribes have so many tools that goes from, I don't know, like Florida water, for example, that is like a perfume, sort of.
yeah,
I mean, it's more than that, but just
yeah,
in
yeah,
short.
yeah,
Or like tobacco, or like other smudges, or
yeah,
singing. There are a lot of ways to
yes,
support anyone goes through a challenging experience. So what are the
yes,
tools in ketamine? So once it's
yes.
open the eyes.
Open the eyes, return to the breath,
Mm-hmm.
support person. And this, I think, kind of also speaks to that tribal aspect, right? Of having a community that's supporting us. This is our community in this moment, as our peer support. I think that, having these tools available, but I think when we have a mindset for more of a spiritual practice, I think it's perfectly fine to fold that in. Perhaps a little Palo Santo or Florida
Mm-hmm.
water. And this is something our peer support could provide. Perhaps our peer support is also aware of like maybe it's time to change the music track, right? Like perhaps
Mm-hmm.
the song is really what's evoking this kind of challenging moment, moving to the next track or changing the
Mm-hmm.
playlist or moving back to maybe some song or prayer or chant. So I think if that's something that spiritually, kind of emotionally works for you, there is no reason not to fold in some of these other elements of what might feel
Mm-hmm.
protection or safe for any one person. I have a little weighted like blanket item that I like to keep on me, like the pressure
Mm-hmm.
makes me feel calm. So weighted blankets, or they make all kinds of weighted things, but sometimes that can really soothe the nervous system when we're just talking about a felt sense. Breath work, open your
Mm-hmm.
eyes, ear support. But then what about following the experience, right? Like, so what about like we've come out of this because ketamine's pretty
Mm-hmm.
quick. So the odds are this didn't last that long.
Yeah.
And now
I
we're
had
kind of, yeah.
one last question on
Yep.
the tools during. So, because we said like, okay, Palo Santo, Florida water, if it's in your spiritual practice. But what about like, let's say technically or better, like from medical perspective, like the smell itself that stimulates that sense. Is that
Yes,
something that helps by itself?
absolutely. Especially when it's like, got an associative kind of track for the brain. Like
Mm-hmm.
for me, I use Palo Santo quite a bit. I got to clear a lot of energy out of my life. So I find that association to be cleansing and
Okay.
ritualistic in a sense. So it very much for me has an associative pathway. So that would be very comforting for me. For
Mm-hmm.
others that may not be as familiar, it could be the scent of rose, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
something very familiar, very familial, right? Like a grandmother type scent. So I think
Yeah.
those types of things, especially smell, can be a very important part. Lavender tends to be,
Mm-hmm.
associated with more of those calming type energies. So
Exactly.
perhaps a lavender like eye pillow.
Mm-hmm.
There are some scents that typically are very much associated with more calming, like down regulatory responses so that we can soothe a bit. It also
Mm-hmm.
focuses us, it kind of encourages us to focus on a different sense, which is always important with
Yeah.
anxiety,
Exactly.
right? So we want to focus on a different kind of sense of ours.
Yeah.
Focus on the smell. Also touch. Touch can be a very big one. So
Uh-huh.
sometimes I even do
Even
a
if
lot of
it's
tapping.
dissociative, you still
Yeah.
feel it. Even if it's
To some
dissociative, you still feel it. Okay, a little bit.
Yeah,
Okay.
to some degree. And I think even though it's altered, that perception is altered, there's an aspect of it that can be distracting enough to kind of pull the attention, even just
Mm-hmm.
slightly, enough to pull us into a space that feels more comfortable.
Okay.
So I think bilateral tapping or bilateral stim is a very important one. You can do butterflies, which are just
Yeah.
these gentle tappings. It's known to soothe our nervous systems. It's known to be a calming practice.
Mm-hmm.
So even if you can't coordinate that, your peer support can do a little bit of tapping just gently, can
Mm-hmm.
really be soothing to the nervous system. So I think those types of things, just a gentle stroking. We use this for women
Yeah.
in labor too. It can be a
Okay.
distraction element. It's very soothing. So for sure, there's
Yeah.
smell, there's touch, and
Yeah.
obviously that's something that you and your peer support have spoken of first.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, it can be very alarming if you do not want touch or
Mm-hmm.
you're altered, and that's not comforting for you.
Yeah. And the last question about that, then we move to the after
Yeah.
experience. And what about also like moving your posture a little bit? Because I have the experience, at least in ayahuasca, that even though it's not dissociative like ketamine, I mean, can be, I guess. But sometimes, even though we're in a comfortable position, maybe it's not as comfortable as we thought. And
Yeah.
as a yoga teacher, I always picked up on that, how maybe someone is laid down, but it's laid down in a way that is actually like not like contracting the
Yeah.
lungs. So
Yes.
certain point is the body screaming, I need more oxygen,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
And that's probably the body's always screaming that. Probably someone is always, like when we sit on the couch or even driving, it's a very uncomfortable position for the lungs actually. But under non-ordinary state of consciousness, it's when we hear the body more. And so sometimes the uncomfort and the challenge is coming from the body's finally being heard. And so changing posture position can
Yes.
be the key, can be the whole thing. We're feeling uncomfortable just because we're actually really uncomfortable, but in the body and the organs have been crushed for so long.
Yes. We've suppressed a lot of that sense, right? Like we have to go through the parts of our day and we
Mm-hmm.
habituate to different postures, not in a good way. So absolutely posture, changing positioning, a shift. It's much harder to do with ketamine on board, as
Yeah.
we do have not just the dissociative properties, but it does have a bit of an anesthetic type quality. So it's more
Yeah.
difficult to move our bodies. So having a bit of like leg support, maybe moving our legs up, getting that blood return back to core can be really soothing, bathes our organs in blood, right? I think sitting up a little bit gives us a little bit of opening in our lungs, right? So we're not
Mm-hmm.
flat, we have a bit of architecture, or sometimes just rolling to our side,
Mm-hmm.
becoming, I think there's something about that kind of fetal positioning that's typically
Yes.
comfortable for many of us, right? We feel
Mm-hmm.
more in the womb. We feel more comforted by that
Mm-hmm.
position, feel safer. So I think absolutely changing our body position is another important strategy that can be very useful following, in the moment of being in a challenged or kind of anxious state of the experience, especially if it's not something we can lean into or embrace. It just feels it's overwhelmed the senses. At that point, it's time to kind of pivot and move away from that intensity and come back a bit. Because it may be something we can revisit when we have a little bit more kind of preparation or
Mm-hmm.
strength, comfort, etc.
Yeah.
So it's kind of honoring our own self in that way.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's one of the best lessons we learn in psychedelics is taking good
Mm-hmm.
care of ourselves in a different way.
Yes,
Um,
absolutely.
and then, following these types of experiences, they can really leave us. I think just one quick thing I should mention is that like
Mm-hmm.
during the experience, there is another kind of option for support. I've had many folks that have had peer supports with them or themselves that have felt so alarmed by what was going on and they needed additional resources. So I think it's important to
Yes.
mention the Fireside Project. They do
Mm-hmm.
a really amazing job at providing psychedelic support and emotional support during and after psychedelic experiences. So they have a number, it's 62 Fireside, that anybody can call from 11 a.m. to 11 p.m. They operate primarily on the West Coast time zone, so the Pacific Standard Time. But they offer this service free of charge to anybody who's having a challenging experience to offer trained support like these types of interventions. So I've had
Mm-hmm.
actually some peer support folks call this line during and had it be incredibly helpful. I think what they're doing is absolutely amazing for the psychedelic community. Providing
Mm-hmm.
this type of experience or this type of support at this time can be vital. So if
Mm-hmm.
ever, clients are feeling beyond their ability to manage or to know what to do, peer support or the client is welcome to call 62 Fireside, or you can text it and get some additional support or guidelines.
Yeah, that's a good point about the peer support. So,
Yeah.
um, so you mentioned you can call this line, and that's amazing. But when would that be? Because I can imagine some peer support may be
Mhm.
more or less prone to be feeling overwhelmed by what the
Yeah.
situation, right? Depending on their experience, their personality, and so on. So, what would be some sign? When would you suggest to
Yeah.
call? Um,
I think there's no wrong time to call. So if you're feeling, especially as the peer support person, overwhelmed with what you're witnessing, perhaps obviously, and this isn't to say that like if you
mhm,
feel like this is an emergency, you should call,
yes.
911, call,
Mm,
emergency services. But if you're just unsure and you're like, they're saying weird things, I'm feeling uncomfortable about how I can support them.
mhm,
I've had a couple of folks use this, especially when their partners were, in the medicine, be like they were moving in a strange way. I wasn't able to elicit a response as far as verbally. I could see them breathing. Everything seemed fine physiologically, but they seemed in a dark place. They felt anxious, and I wasn't sure how to help. I think sometimes this can be a very reassuring place to just get a little bit of support and like
mhm,
maybe gentle touch or remind us, right, how to kind of show up in a supportive way. I have had those that had the things they were saying out loud were so concerning to the folks in the not in the ordinary state that they were like, I don't know if this makes sense. I don't know how to relate to this in this moment, right? We're in
mhm,
one completely altered consciousness and one very non-altered consciousness. So I think if you're ever
mhm,
in doubt, it's always worth calling and saying, is there more I could
mhm,
do? Is there more I could provide or support? So I don't think there's any wrong reason to call them, but I do
uh-huh.
think it's a valuable support line. And I absolutely love everything that they're providing for the psychedelic communities and peer support out there. That's not to say that the person with the medicine can also call. So I've had lots of people under other psychedelics that have also used this when they're like,
Ah,
this isn't going well.
okay.
So they can be a very wonderful support. But again, always if you think there's a medical emergency going on, it's worth calling 911 or emergency services to make sure that they've been evaluated. I
Mhm,
haven't seen this happen clinically um, very often. I would say it's incredibly rare. I can recall maybe one instance in 3 years of this happening where there was something medically that seemed strange. That's always worth warranting getting an evaluation.
mhm.
Uh, I'd never want to undermine that.
Absolutely,
And then
absolutely.
following the experience, what do we do? How do we integrate these challenging experiences?
Yeah.
I
Let's
think there's a
maybe
lot.
just like start to list them because I
Yeah,
noticed the time. So I guess like this
yeah,
this topic is really very important. So I'm glad we focused a lot in during the
yeah,
experience, so we can just list a
yeah,
little bit of what it's after the experience, and then as it's a very important topic, then we can do another podcast just focus
yeah,
on the challenge after. But
yeah.
let's go ahead.
And I think this can leave us with a bit of rupture or sense of something's wrong in our psyche, in
Mhm,
our felt sense. So it's really important to take our own time to process and digest. So there is some self integration work we want to do. We want to spend some time with self. We want to evaluate this.
mhm,
We want to kind of turn it around and see what else is here and how could I learn
mhm,
from this. I think ways to do that are journaling, and there's a technique known as expressive writing that can be very useful here. It's where you just write for 10 to 15 minutes and you write
mhm,
everything that comes. It's just a
mhm.
free form type of writing, and it can be a very beautiful way of just kind of purging what's in our head and our
Yeah,
emotions into somewhere else.
that's a
I
great
think,
technique all the time. When
yeah,
you're
all the
overwhelmed in your mind, whatever, just
yes,
do
yeah,
that.
like free writing, and I think
Yes,
that's a beautiful exercise. I think it's really important in these spaces to utilize coaches,
yes,
psychotherapists, therapy,
yes.
counseling, psychiatry, spiritually,
Mhm,
counseling. I think any of those things bode very well here as a way to process, a way to
mhm,
evaluate, a way to safely see things we might not be seeing and fold them in. So utilizing your resources. I think quiet time, walks in nature allow us to
mm.
process. I
Oh,
think
yes.
times in prayer can be very useful as well, right?
I would say walk in nature and even lay in
Yeah,
nature, and even walk bare feet. And
yeah,
it is really important. I'm saying that from yoga, but it's really
yes,
this direct contact with the earth
yes,
is really, really important. Reconnect us back. And there is there's also other health benefits, but really reconnect us back. And there's a
Yes.
sense of calm. Even as we were just saying, for expressive writing is good, and any time in your life you feel anxious, definitely after challenging experience, or if you feel challenged, it is possible that the experience was challenging, but the aftermath, it is amazing. You just feel bliss out. Or it can be the other way around, that it's a great experience, not really challenging, and after we feel some challenges. So if you feel some challenges after, so yeah, go in nature, walk bare feet. Sometimes I'm like, I look at the trees or the grass, and like I just want to roll in the
Me too.
grass.
Yeah. I love it. Forest bathe, get out there, hug a tree. Like, absolutely. I'm in. I think co-regulating with pets too. We often
Yes, pets.
forget
Yes.
that like our pets' nervous systems are basically designed to kind of help soothe ours as ours are meant to help soothe theirs. So like just co-regulating, spending time cuddling or with a pet on the lap or petting a pet can be very soothing behaviors. And I think that's often missed when we evaluate those calming things. Nature is really important.
Yes.
I had someone mention the other day Skywatch, which is my new term I'm using. It's like watching the sky, which is my favorite pastime. So like watch clouds, spend time in nature, being present. I think those are the ways we can reflect more appropriately. Um, and taking breaks. So I think the last thing I'll close with is making sure that we're not entering the state again until we are prepared. I want everyone that's a challenging experience to really take the time it takes to absorb this, integrate this, make meaning from this, and feel comfortable before we're moving into that next dosing series. That's a really important key feature. It's typically not useful to go, well, I'll just do it again and try to it'll be different this time. It might be, but it isn't always useful. And it typically kind of, it does a lot of forcing with our nervous system versus like
Yes.
grace and acceptance and kind of
Yes.
embrace. And I know there's probably some more, but I think the most important part is probably using that community resource, right? Using your therapist, your coach, your spiritual counselor, your guidance out there. This is how we heal in tribes. This is why we heal in tribes and community. So using that as a really valuable resource, and then taking the time for self as well. So expressive writing, journaling, meditation, prayer, nature are all really valuable parts, just as they are for any type of experience, so that we can make meaning from these challenging places. We can fold them in to make us more resilient. We can see the hard stuff. And I think that's the most important part. That's how we create change.
Absolutely. That's beautiful. So what would be the, I don't know, maybe the keywords here?
For me, I think it comes up as embracing, right? Like we want to be able to embrace challenging experiences across the board in life. We're never getting out of them, unfortunately. We were not placed here to be all pleasure. So it really is kind of stopping avoiding them and being able to integrate them as meaningful parts of the path on our life, right? All challenging experiences, including in the non-ordinary state, can have meaning, can have transformation with them. And I think it's important that we start to frame them that way, right? As a part of life versus something to be avoided or kind of anxiety provoking or negative. They are a normal part of our lives that we have to integrate.
Absolutely. That's beautiful. I was thinking on preparation.
Very good.
Yeah, how important it is to, as you said, like anything can happen in life, and that's how life works. And so, but if we're well prepared, so we can face anything, whether in life or in this or non-ordinary state of mind.
Yeah. Very well put. And I think prep and embracing is probably two great takeaways, at least from this theme. And I think more to come on other podcasts. I think there's probably more to say, but for today, I think we'll keep it simple and close it up.
Absolutely. So thank you, Rachel. Thank you, everyone, for listening. And as always, you can comment, ask us more questions. We're very happy to do more podcasts and share more information with all of you. Thank you.
Always. Thank you, everyone.